Elena Volkov sat in the corner of the practice room, her fingers moving quietly across the piano keys. It was late evening, and most students had already left the Vienna Music Conservatory for the day. This was her favorite time, when the hallways were empty and nobody was watching, when she could just be herself. She was 19 years old, thin and nervous-looking, with dark hair always tied back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were plain, mostly hand-me-downs from her older sister back home. While other students wore expensive dresses and carried designer bags, Elena carried everything she owned in a worn backpack that her father had given her before she left their small village. That village felt like another world now. It was a tiny place in Eastern Europe where everyone knew everyone. Her family ran a bakery there. Every morning her mother would wake up at 4 to start baking bread. The smell of fresh loaves would fill their small apartment above the shop. Elena missed that smell. She missed her younger brothers arguing over the last piece of cake. She missed her father's terrible jokes while kneading dough. But she was here now at one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. How she got here was still a mystery to her sometimes. A traveling musician had stopped in their village 3 years ago. He heard her playing piano in the local church and told her parents she had talent. Real talent. He helped her apply for a scholarship, and somehow, miraculously, she got in. The conservatory was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The building was old, with high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Everything looked expensive and important. The other students came from wealthy families. They had been taking private lessons since they were 3 years old. They talked about concerts they had attended in Paris and London. They discussed famous musicians like they were old friends. Elena felt like an outsider every single day. In classes, she always sat in the back row. She never raised her hand, never volunteered to play first. When Professor Hoffman called on her, her hands would shake so badly she could barely hold her sheet music. The other students would glance at each other with those looks that said, "How did she even get in here?" Her roommate Sophia was kind but came from a completely different world. Sophia's father was a diplomat. She had a closet full of concert dresses and had performed at important venues since she was 12. But Sophia never made Elena feel small. She would often bring Elena coffee during late-night study sessions and tell her she practiced too much. "You're always in those basement studios," Sophia would say. "You need to live a little. Come to the cafe with us." But Elena couldn't. She felt like she was already so far behind everyone else. While other students seemed to play effortlessly, Elena had to work twice as hard to keep up. Or at least that's what she thought. The truth was more complicated. Professor Hoffman, her main instructor, had noticed something odd about Elena. She played every piece exactly as it was written. Every note, every dynamic marking, every tempo instruction followed to perfection. It was technically flawless, but it was also strangely mechanical. There was no personal interpretation, no emotional risk-taking, no artistic voice. "You play like you're afraid of the music," he told her once after a lesson, "like you're trying to disappear into the notes instead of making them your own." Elena had just nodded, not knowing how to explain that disappearing was exactly what she was trying to do. During master classes, when famous visiting musicians would coach students, Elena would watch from the back. She saw how other students would take risks, adding their own flair and interpretation. Sometimes the visiting masters would praise them. Sometimes they would criticize them harshly. But at least they were being seen. At least they were being remembered. Elena chose to be forgotten. It felt safer that way. Her classmates had their own opinions about her. Some thought she was stuck up, too proud to socialize. Others thought she simply wasn't talented enough to compete at this level. A few felt sorry for her. There was one group of students who would practice in the main hall, the one with the best acoustics. They were the stars of the conservatory, the ones everyone knew would have successful careers. Elena would walk past them quickly, eyes down, hoping they wouldn't notice her. "That's the scholarship girl," she heard one of them whisper once. Technically fine, but you know, no soul in her playing. Those words had stung more than she wanted to admit. But part of her believed they were right. Maybe she didn't have that special something, that spark that separated good musicians from great ones. What nobody knew, what Elena kept hidden like a precious secret, was that every night after everyone else had gone to sleep, she would sneak down to the basement practice rooms. These rooms were old and forgotten, with out-of-tune pianos and broken heating. Nobody used them except for storage, but Elena loved them, because in those rooms with their peeling paint and dusty corners, Elena became a different person. She would sit at the old piano, and her fingers would find melodies that existed nowhere in the world except in her head. She composed. She created. She poured everything she couldn't say out loud into original pieces of music. She had notebooks filled with compositions, pieces she had written about missing home, about feeling alone in a crowded city, about the pressure of trying to prove she belonged, about the beauty of her mother's hands covered in flour, about her father's voice singing old folk songs. The music that came from her during these secret sessions was nothing like what she played in class. It was wild and free and deeply emotional. It broke rules. It took risks. It was uniquely, completely hers, but she never showed it to anyone. The fear was too great. What if they laughed? What if they confirmed what she already suspected? That she didn't really belong here, that her scholarship was a mistake? It was easier to play it safe, to be invisible, to just get through each day without drawing attention. Sophia had walked in on her once, late at night. Elena was so lost in her own composition she didn't hear the door open. When she finally noticed Sophia standing there, she stopped abruptly, her face turning red. "That was beautiful," Sophia had said softly. "What was that piece?" "Nothing," Elena had replied quickly, closing the piano. "Just nothing. Something I was messing around with." Sophia had looked like she wanted to say more, but Elena had grabbed her things and practically run out of the room. Now, sitting in her usual corner practice room, Elena pulled out her latest composition. She had been working on it for months. It started with a simple folk melody from her village, the kind her grandmother used to hum while cooking. But then it evolved into something bigger, something that expressed everything she felt but couldn't say. She played through it quietly even though no one else was around. It was habit now, always quiet, always careful, always afraid. Outside the practice room window, the Vienna streets were alive with people heading to concerts and restaurants. The city was beautiful, especially at night, but Elena felt disconnected from all of it. She was here but not really here, present but invisible. Her phone buzzed, a message from her mother asking how she was doing. Elena typed back the usual response. "Everything is fine. Classes are good. Don't worry about me." She didn't mention how lonely she felt, how out of place, how sometimes she wanted to just go home and help in the bakery and forget about music entirely. But then she thought about that traveling musician who had heard her play in the village church. He had told her she had a gift, that it would be a waste not to pursue it. Her parents had sacrificed so much to let her come here. They were so proud of her she couldn't give up. She wouldn't. Elena looked down at her composition again, at the notes that represented her true voice. Someday maybe she would find the courage to share it, but not today. Today she would keep being the quiet, unremarkable student in the back of the class. It felt like the only way to survive. The announcement appeared on the bulletin board outside the main concert hall on a cold Monday morning. Students crowded around it, pushing and jostling to read the notice. Elena stood at the back of the crowd, standing on her tiptoes to try to see what the excitement was about. "It's the International Young Musicians Competition," someone shouted. "They're holding auditions here next month." The crowd erupted in excited chatter. Elena managed to squeeze closer and read the poster herself. The competition was one of the most prestigious in Europe. The winner would receive a recording contract with a major classical music label and a performance tour across 6 countries. It was the kind of opportunity that could launch a real career. But what caught Elena's attention was the audition requirement. Applicants had to perform a simple folk melody of their choice. Just that. Nothing fancy or complicated. A folk melody, that's it. Someone next to her scoffed. "Just a folk song? What's the point of that?" "They probably want to see how we interpret something basic," another student replied. "You know, test our musicality with simple material." Elena walked away from the crowd, her mind spinning. A folk melody? She knew dozens of them from her village. Songs her grandmother had taught her. Melodies that had been passed down for generations. But surely everyone else would know folk songs too. What would make hers special? By lunchtime, the whole conservatory was buzzing about the competition. In the cafeteria, groups of students discussed which folk songs they might choose. Some were already practicing, booking the good practice rooms weeks in advance. Sophia found Elena sitting alone at their usual table, pushing food around her plate without eating. "You should audition," Sophia said, sliding into the seat across from her. Elena looked up, surprised. "Me? No, I don't think so. Why not?" Sophia asked, biting into an apple. "You're good enough. Better than half the people who are going to audition." Elena shook her head. "Those people are different. They perform all the time. They're comfortable on stage. I'm not like that. So you'll just never try?" Sophia pressed. "You'll just hide in practice rooms forever?" The words stung because they were true. Elena looked down at her hands. I don't think I'm ready for something like that," Sophia sighed. "You know what I think? I think you're more ready than you believe. That music I heard you playing that night, that was real. That was special. The stuff you play in class is fine, but it's not you." Elena felt her chest tighten. "That was just messing around." "It didn't sound like messing around to me," Sophia said softly. "It sounded like someone who actually has something to say." The conversation stayed with Elena for the rest of the day. During afternoon classes, she couldn't concentrate. Professor Hoffman was demonstrating proper pedal technique, but Elena's mind was elsewhere. Could she really do this? Could she actually audition? After classes ended, she walked through the city instead of going straight back to her dorm. Vienna was beautiful in the late afternoon light. The old buildings glowed golden. Street musicians played on corners. Tourists took photos of everything. Elena found herself in front of a music shop. In the window there was a poster advertising a performance by one of the judges for the upcoming competition. A woman named Katerina Petrova. Elena recognized the name. She was a famous composer and pianist, someone people called a living legend. Elena stared at the poster, at this woman who had achieved everything Elena dreamed of. What would someone like that think of a nervous scholarship student from a tiny village? Would she even notice her among all the talented performers? That evening, Elena's phone rang. It was her mother video calling from the bakery. Elena answered to see her mother's flour-covered face smiling at the camera. "My darling, how are you?" "I'm good, Mama," Elena said, trying to sound cheerful. Behind her mother, she could see her father preparing dough for tomorrow's bread. Her brothers were arguing about something in the background. The familiar chaos of home. "We saw on your school's website about a big competition," her mother said. "Are you going to participate?" Elena hadn't realized the announcement was on the public website. I don't know yet. Why not?" Her father's voice called from behind. He came closer to the camera, his hands covered in flour. "You're as good as any of them. Papa, you don't understand. These students have been performing their whole lives. They're so confident and talented, and I'm just what?" Her mother interrupted gently. "Just our daughter who has worked harder than anyone? Who practiced until her fingers hurt? Who earned a scholarship to one of the best schools in the world?" Elena felt tears building in her eyes. "But what if I fail? What if I embarrass myself? What if I prove everyone right who thinks I don't belong here?" Her mother's expression softened. "Oh, sweetheart. You know what your grandmother used to say? The bread that's most afraid of the oven never gets baked. It stays as dough forever." It was such a typical thing for her mother to say, relating everything to baking, but somehow it made Elena smile through her tears. "Think about it," her father added. "But whatever you decide, we're proud of you. You're already brave just for being there." After they hung up, Elena sat on her bed for a long time. Sophia was at the library studying. The room was quiet except for the sounds of the city outside their window. Elena pulled out her notebook, the one filled with her secret compositions. She flipped through pages of music that no one had ever heard except her. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. But the fear was still there. Massive and overwhelming. What if she auditioned and they hated her playing? What if she froze on stage? What if she made a fool of herself in front of everyone? The next few days passed in a blur. Everywhere she went, students were practicing their folk songs. The practice rooms were booked solid. Even students who normally didn't work very hard were suddenly practicing hours each day. The competition had created a fever pitch of energy in the conservatory. Elena attended her usual lessons, played her usual pieces in her usual careful way. Professor Hoffman was discussing her progress or lack of it. "You're technically proficient," he said, closing her sheet music. "But you need to understand something. Technical skill will only take you so far. At some point you need to make artistic choices. You need to have a point of view." "Yes, Professor," Elena said quietly. the words she always said. He looked at her for a long moment. I heard you're thinking about the competition. Elena's eyes widened. I haven't decided. Professor Hoffman leaned back in his chair. Can I be honest with you? Elena nodded, bracing herself. I don't think you're ready for something like this, he said, not unkindly. Competitions are high-pressure situations. They require not just skill but confidence, stage presence, the ability to handle nerves. I think you should focus on building your fundamentals first. Maybe try competing in a year or two. Elena felt something sink in her chest. Oh, okay. Thank you for your honesty, Professor. Walking out of that lesson, Elena felt smaller than ever. Even her teacher didn't think she could do it. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she should just accept her place as an average student who would graduate and teach piano lessons in some small town somewhere. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Sophia snored softly across the room. Around midnight, Elena gave up on sleep and grabbed her notebook. She headed down to the basement practice rooms to her favorite forgotten room with the old piano. She sat down and began to play. Not a folk melody, not a classical piece. Her own composition, the one she had been working on for months. The one that started with her grandmother's lullaby and evolved into something entirely her own. As she played, something shifted inside her. This music was real. It was honest. It was hers. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that had to be enough. When she finished playing, she sat in the silence of that dusty old room. And then, quietly, she made a decision. She would audition. Not because she thought she would win. Not because she was confident or ready. But because if she didn't try now, she might never find the courage to try at all. The bread that's most afraid of the oven never gets baked. It was time to stop being dough. The morning of the audition, Elena woke up at 5 in the morning even though her alarm was set for 7. Her stomach was in knots. She had barely slept, tossing and turning all night, running through her plan over and over in her mind. Sophia was still asleep, buried under her blankets. Elena got up quietly and went to the bathroom. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Dark circles under her eyes, her face pale with anxiety. She splashed cold water on her face and tried to breathe normally. Today was the day. No turning back now. She had registered for the audition 2 weeks ago, filling out the form with trembling hands. She was number 23 on the list. 23 people would perform before her. 23 chances to watch other students succeed while her confidence slowly crumbled. By 7, Sophia was awake and trying to be encouraging. You're going to be amazing, she said, braiding Elena's hair for her. Just remember to breathe. Elena could barely eat breakfast. She forced down some toast and tea, but everything tasted like cardboard. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She had her sheet music in a folder, even though she had memorized every note. The papers felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. They arrived at the conservatory's grand concert hall at 9. Auditions started at 10. The hall was magnificent, the kind of room that had hosted famous musicians for over 200 years. High ceilings with painted frescoes, red velvet seats, a beautiful grand piano on the stage that probably cost more than her family's entire bakery. Students were everywhere, warming up in practice rooms, pacing in hallways, talking nervously with friends. Elena saw some of the conservatory's star students, the ones everyone expected would go far. They looked confident, relaxed even, like this was just another day for them. Elena found a quiet corner and sat down, clutching her folder. Sophia stayed with her for a while, but then had to leave for her own classes. You've got this, Sophia whispered, squeezing her hand. Show them what you showed me that night. Then Elena was alone with her thoughts and her fear. The auditions began right on time. Elena could hear the music from where she sat in the waiting area. The acoustics in the building were incredible. She could hear every note, every phrase, every breath. The first student played a Russian folk song, something cheerful and bright. Technically perfect. The judges clapped politely when she finished. The second student chose an Irish melody. Also beautiful, also flawless. One by one, students went in and came out. Some looked relieved. Some looked disappointed. All of them had done exactly what was asked. They played their folk melodies beautifully, professionally, exactly as expected. Elena's hands grew colder as the morning wore on. She was number 23. She watched the numbers climb, 15, 16, 17. Each performance was good, Really good. These were talented musicians who knew what they were doing. Around noon, they took a short break. Elena tried to eat the sandwich Sophia had packed for her, but couldn't manage more than a few bites. Her mouth was too dry, her stomach too twisted. She went to a practice room to warm up. Her fingers felt stiff and clumsy. The simple folk melody she had chosen, her grandmother's lullaby, felt foreign under her hands. And the composition she had secretly planned to play afterward? The one she'd been working on for months? The one nobody knew she was going to perform? That felt absolutely insane. What was she thinking? She should just play the folk song and leave. That's what they asked for. That's what everyone else was doing. Why did she think she could do something different? But then she remembered her mother's words. The bread afraid of the oven never gets baked. She remembered all those nights in the basement practice room, playing music that came from her soul. She remembered feeling invisible for so long. Maybe it was time to be seen. Really seen, even if it meant failing spectacularly. The auditions resumed after lunch. The judges looked tired. Elena could see them through the doorway when it opened between performers. 3 of them sat at a table in the middle of the hall. One was Katerina Petrova, the famous composer. The others were distinguished musicians whose names Elena had only read in books. They were checking their phones between performances, whispering to each other. One judge yawned. These auditions were probably boring for them. Just another day listening to competent students play simple folk songs. Number 20 arrived, a tall boy who always sat in the front of class. He played a German folk tune with perfect posture and perfect technique. The judges clapped. He bowed and left. Number 21, a girl with red hair who performed a Celtic melody that made everyone smile. Beautiful phrasing. Lovely tone. The judges nodded appreciatively. Number 22, a confident student who had already performed in several professional concerts. His folk song was energetic and impressive. When he finished, the judges actually smiled and said, "Very nice. Thank you." Then it was Elena's turn. Number 23, an assistant called Elena Volkov. Elena stood up on legs that felt like water. She gathered her folder. Even though what she was about to do wasn't written in any standard sheet music, she had brought her own handwritten pages. Pages that had lived in her notebook for months. Pages she had never shown to anyone except herself. She walked toward the stage entrance. The hallway felt impossibly long. Each step echoed. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. As she entered the hall, she saw the judges for the first time up close. Katerina Petrova was writing something in a notebook. Another judge was drinking coffee. The third was looking at his watch. They barely glanced up as Elena walked to the piano. The hall was enormous from the stage. Empty red velvet seats stretched back into shadows. The ceiling seemed miles above her. The piano looked both beautiful and terrifying. Elena sat on the bench. She adjusted the height slightly, buying herself a few more seconds. Her hands were ice cold. She flexed her fingers, trying to warm them up. One of the judges, not looking up from his papers, said in a bored voice, "Please state your name and proceed with your folk melody selection." "Elena Volkov," she managed to say. Her voice sounded tiny in the big hall. "I'll be playing a lullaby from my home village." "Proceed," the judge said, still not really looking at her. Elena placed her hands on the keys. They trembled visibly. She took a breath. Then another. This was it. No going back. She began to play. The melody was simple, just as they asked for. Her grandmother's lullaby, the one she used to sing to Elena when she was small. Gentle and sweet and uncomplicated. For the first 8 measures, Elena played it exactly as it had been sung for generations. Soft and traditional and safe. The judges weren't even watching. Katerina Petrova was still writing in her notebook. This was just one more audition in a long day of auditions. But then Elena reached the place where the traditional melody would repeat. And instead of repeating it, she began to change it. Her fingers found new harmonies beneath the simple tune. The lullaby started to transform, growing richer and more complex. She added a counter melody in her left hand, something that wove around the original tune like a conversation. The folk song was still there, but it was becoming something else, something that belonged only to Elena, and she was just getting started. Elena's whole body began to relax as the music took over. The fear started to fade. This was what she had done in those midnight practice sessions. This was her truth. This was her voice. In the hall, something shifted. Katerina Petrova's pen stopped moving. She looked up from her notebook. The judge with the coffee cup paused with it halfway to his lips. The third judge, the one who had been checking his watch, straightened in his chair. Elena didn't notice any of this. Her eyes were closed now. She was somewhere else entirely. She was in her grandmother's kitchen, in her family's bakery, in the basement practice room where she had finally found the courage to be herself. The simple lullaby was transforming into something extraordinary. And Elena was just beginning. Her fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence. This was no longer the careful, frightened student who sat in the back of every class. This was someone else entirely, someone who had been hiding. Someone who was finally ready to be heard. The transformation had begun. Elena's fingers danced across the keys as the simple lullaby began to evolve into something nobody in that hall had expected. The transformation wasn't sudden or jarring. It was organic, like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. The original melody was still present, but now it was wrapped in layers of harmony that Elena had spent months perfecting in her secret practice sessions. Each note she added felt inevitable, as if the music had always been meant to exist this way and was just waiting for someone to discover it. Katerina Petrova leaned forward in her chair, her eyes fixed on the young woman at the piano. The other two judges had stopped what they were doing entirely. The bored expressions had vanished from their faces. Something was happening on that stage, something unusual. Elena had no idea they were watching her so intently. She was lost in her own world now, a place where fear didn't exist and only music mattered. Her grandmother's lullaby, that simple tune she had heard 1,000 times, was becoming a conversation. The melody in her right hand spoke of childhood and innocence and home. The harmony in her left hand answered with complexity and longing and the ache of distance. The dynamics began to shift. What had started soft and gentle was growing. Not louder exactly, but deeper, more present. Elena's whole body moved with the music now. Her shoulders swayed slightly. Her head tilted as if she was listening to something only she could hear. In the back of the concert hall, a door opened quietly. A staff member had been passing by and heard something different from the usual audition performances. He stepped inside, curious. Then he stayed, unable to walk away. Elena's fingers found a particularly beautiful chord progression, something she had discovered one night when she was feeling especially homesick. The major chords spoke of happy memories. The minor chords acknowledged the sadness of being far from everything familiar. Back and forth they went, like the tide, like breathing, like life itself. The judges exchanged glances. Katerina Petrova's expression had changed completely. Her eyes were bright with interest now. She reached for her pen again, but this time to make notes about what she was hearing, not to pass the time. The music continued to build. Elena introduced a new element, a rhythmic pattern that suggested her father's hands kneading bread dough. Steady, reliable, the heartbeat of home. Over this rhythm, the lullaby melody soared higher, transforming from a child's bedtime song into something that spoke of growing up, leaving home, chasing dreams. It was autobiography written in notes instead of words. It was every emotion Elena had been too afraid to express out loud. All the loneliness of being far from home, all the fear of not being good enough, all the secret hope that maybe, just maybe, she had something valuable to offer the world. In the practice rooms nearby, other students waiting for their turn had stopped their warm-ups. They could hear something unusual happening in the main hall. A few of them crept closer to listen. Someone whispered, "Who is that playing?" Someone else shushed them to listen. Elena's teacher, Professor Hoffman, was in his office reviewing scores when he heard the music filtering through the old building. He recognized the folk melody immediately, a common lullaby from Eastern Europe. But what was being done with it? He stood up from his desk, drawn toward the sound. The music reached a moment of suspension, hanging in the air like a question. Elena held a chord, letting it ring out, the sustain pedal pressed down so the notes bled together into something atmospheric and dreamlike. This was the bridge she had written to connect her grandmother's lullaby to what came next. What came next was the dangerous part. The part where Elena would stop following any rules at all, where she would play the full composition she had created, the piece nobody knew existed, the piece she had been too afraid to share. For a split second, doubt tried to creep back in. She could stop now. She could end with a nice resolution of the folk melody. She could bow and leave and have done a perfectly acceptable audition. Strange maybe, but not completely crazy. But something in Elena had shifted. Maybe it was adrenaline. Maybe it was all those months of hiding finally becoming too heavy to carry. Maybe it was just that the music wanted to exist in the world, not just in her notebook and late-night practice sessions. Her hands stayed on the keys. The question chord resolved, but not back to the lullaby. It resolved forward into something entirely new. She began the first movement of her original concerto. The transition was seamless, as if the lullaby had been the introduction all along. The folk tune became a theme that would weave throughout the larger piece. Elena's composition took that simple melody and used it as a foundation to build a musical story. The first section was about departure, leaving home. The music here was energetic but tinged with sadness. Quick passages in her right hand suggested movement, travel, the excitement of new possibilities. The left hand maintained a slower, heavier rhythm underneath, the reluctance to leave everything known and safe. Katerina Petrova was writing rapidly now in her notebook. She glanced at the other judges, her eyebrows raised in an expression that clearly said, "Are you hearing this?" They were. All three of them were completely focused on Elena now. The bored restlessness of sitting through 22 adequate auditions had evaporated. This was different. This was real. Elena's fingers flew across the keys in a particularly complex passage she had practiced hundreds of times. It represented arriving in Vienna, the overwhelming rush of noise and people and buildings and everything being too much all at once. The notes tumbled over each other, controlled chaos, beauty, and terror mixed together. Then the music softened again, becoming introspective. This was the lonely part. The part about being surrounded by talented people and feeling completely alone. The melody here was fragile, tentative, always questioning. Am I good enough? Do I belong here? Should I just go home? Professor Hoffman had reached the back of the concert hall now. He stood in the shadows, staring at the stage in complete disbelief. That small, quiet student who never took risks, who played every piece exactly as written, who seemed to have no artistic voice of her own. Was that girl playing this extraordinary music? He listened more carefully. The composition was sophisticated, showing genuine understanding of structure and development. But more than that, it was emotional. It was honest. It was vulnerable in a way that professional musicians spent years learning to achieve. How long had she been able to do this? Why had she hidden it? On stage, Elena's body language had completely transformed. The nervous, frightened girl who had walked to the piano 15 minutes ago was gone. In her place was a musician in complete command of her instrument and her artistic vision. Her eyes were still closed, but her face showed everything she was feeling. When the music was sad, you could see sadness in her expression. When it built to something triumphant, she smiled slightly. The piece moved into a new section, one Elena had written just 2 weeks ago. It was about decision, about choosing to be brave. The music here had determination in it. The left hand played a steady, march-like rhythm. The right hand wove increasingly complex patterns above it, growing in confidence with each measure. This was the part where she had decided to audition, where she had decided to stop hiding, where she had chosen to let herself be seen, consequences be damned. A few more students had gathered at the back of the hall now, drawn by curiosity about what was taking so long. Auditions were supposed to be 3 to 4 minutes. Elena had been playing for nearly 10 minutes already and showed no signs of stopping. "Who was that?" someone whispered. "The scholarship student," someone else answered. "The quiet one who never talks. That's her? Playing like that?" They fell silent again, listening. The music built toward what felt like it might be a climax, then surprised everyone by softening instead. This was another technique Elena had learned from studying the great composers. Don't always do what's expected. Let the music breathe. Give the listener space to absorb what they've heard. This quieter section brought back fragments of the original lullaby, but transformed now. Older, wiser. The innocence was still there, but it was innocence that had learned something about the world. The melody that had been so simple at the beginning now carried weight and meaning it didn't have before. Katerina Petrova found herself leaning forward even more, not wanting to miss a single note. She had judged hundreds of competitions over her long career. She had heard technically perfect performances. She had heard impressive displays of virtuosity, but this combination of technical skill and raw emotional honesty from someone so young, this was rare. This was special. This was the kind of talent that appears maybe once in a generation if you're lucky. Elena continued to play, unaware of the audience growing at the back of the hall. Unaware of her professor standing there in shock. Unaware that she had already played far longer than the rules allowed. None of that mattered. She was telling her story, and the story wasn't finished yet. The music swelled as Elena entered what she had always thought of as the heart of her composition. This was the section she had worked on longest, rewriting it dozens of times until it felt exactly right. It was about finding your voice, about the moment when you stop being afraid and start being yourself. The melody here was bold and unapologetic. No more hesitation, no more hiding. The notes rang out clear and strong, filling every corner of the magnificent concert hall. Elena's fingers moved with absolute certainty now, each phrase building on the last, creating a momentum that felt inevitable and thrilling. This was the section that incorporated techniques she had learned from studying the great composers. She used counterpoint like she was having a conversation with herself. The right hand would state a theme and the left hand would answer it. Then they would switch roles, the left hand leading while the right hand responded. It was complex but never felt forced or academic. It was organic, alive. At the back of the hall, more people had gathered. Word had spread through the building that something extraordinary was happening in the audition. Students, faculty, even maintenance workers had found reasons to slip inside and listen. They stood in the shadows, afraid to make any noise that might disturb what was unfolding on stage. Sophia had heard about it between classes. Someone had run up to her and said, "Your roommate is doing something crazy in the audition." She had sprinted to the concert hall, arriving breathless. Now she stood at the back, tears streaming down her face, watching her quiet friend transform into someone magnificent. Elena played a passage that always gave her chills, even when she practiced it alone. It was technically demanding, requiring her hands to move in opposite directions while maintaining independent melodic lines. But more than the technical challenge, it was emotionally powerful. This was the music of struggle, of working harder than everyone else, of practicing until your fingers hurt, of refusing to give up even when everything seems impossible. Professor Hoffman listened with growing amazement. He recognized elements of classical structure in the piece. Elena had clearly studied the masters. There were hints of how the great composers had built their concertos. But she hadn't just copied them. She had absorbed their lessons and created something entirely her own, something that sounded both timeless and completely contemporary. He thought about all the lessons he had given her, all the times he had criticized her for being too careful, too mechanical. He had thought she lacked artistic vision. What an absolute fool he had been. She hadn't lacked vision. She had been terrified to show it. Katerina Petrova was no longer taking notes. She had put down her pen and was simply listening, experiencing the music as a listener rather than a judge. This was the gift of a truly great performance. It made you forget to analyze and just feel. The piece moved into a new section, one that spoke of hope. The harmonies here were brighter, more optimistic. The melody climbed higher, reaching toward something beautiful and just out of reach. Elena had written this part thinking about her dreams, about what it would feel like to actually belong, to be seen not as the scholarship student or the quiet girl in the back, but as a real musician with something valuable to say. The left hand maintained a steady, pulsing rhythm underneath like a heartbeat. Like determination, like refusing to stop, the right hand soared above it, taking risks, reaching for notes at the very top of the keyboard, then diving back down in cascading runs that sparkled like water. More people continued to filter into the hall. The assistant who had been calling names for auditions had abandoned his post. Other students who were supposed to audition next didn't care about their turn anymore. They just wanted to hear what this girl was doing. Someone in the crowd whispered, "How long has she been playing?" 15 minutes at least, someone answered. But they're letting her continue? Everyone looked at the judges. None of them had moved to stop her. They were as captivated as everyone else. Elena brought back the original lullaby theme again, but completely transformed now. It was no longer simple or childlike. It carried all the weight of everything that had come before. The innocence was still recognizable, But it was innocence that had been tested and had survived. Innocence that had grown into wisdom without losing its essential sweetness. This was the part of the piece Elena loved most. This was where everything came together. All the different themes she had introduced throughout the composition started to weave together, creating a rich tapestry of sound. The lullaby, the rhythm of bread making, the chaos of arriving in a new city, the loneliness, the determination, all of it present at once, somehow working together in harmony. The technical demands of this section were enormous. Helena's hands moved across the entire keyboard, sometimes crossing over each other, sometimes spanning distances that seemed impossible. But she had practiced this so many times that her body knew what to do. Muscle memory took over, freeing her mind to focus purely on the emotion and meaning behind every note. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her arms were starting to ache, but she couldn't stop now. She was almost there, almost at the place where the whole piece had been heading from the very first note. The music built and built, growing in intensity and volume. Every element combined, creating layers of sound that filled the hall with almost overwhelming richness. This was the climax, the moment everything had been building toward. The moment of triumph, of breaking through fear, of finally letting yourself be heard. Elena's whole body moved with the force of the music. She leaned into the piano, putting her entire being into each chord. The sound was massive, powerful, filling every corner of the room and probably echoing through the entire building. And then, just when it seemed like the music couldn't get any bigger, Elena did something unexpected. She began to pull back. The volume decreased. The complexity simplified. The enormous, overwhelming sound started to distill down to something quieter, something more intimate. This was the genius of her composition. She didn't end with a big, showy finish. Instead, she brought it back to where it started. Back to the lullaby, back to home. But this lullaby was different from the one she had played at the beginning. It was the same melody, but now it carried all the weight of the journey. Every note meant something more. The simple tune had become profound through everything it had experienced. Elena played softer and softer, the music becoming almost whisper quiet. The melody was fragile now, delicate like something precious that needed to be handled with care. This was about remembering who you are, about staying connected to your roots even as you grow and change, about bringing your whole self to your art, including the parts that feel small and scared. The hall was absolutely silent except for the piano. No one moved. No one breathed. Everyone was completely transfixed by what they were hearing. Elena played the final phrases of the lullaby, the ones her grandmother used to sing at the very end when she was trying to get little Elena to finally fall asleep. The notes were slow, peaceful, resolved. The journey was complete. All the questions had been answered. All the struggles had led somewhere meaningful. She played the last chord very softly, letting it hang in the air. Then, with careful precision, she released the sustain pedal slowly, allowing the sound to fade naturally rather than cutting off abruptly. The final note disappeared into silence. Elena sat perfectly still at the piano, her hands resting on the keys, her eyes still closed. She was afraid to open them, afraid to come back to reality, afraid to face whatever reaction waited for her. The silence in the hall stretched on. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. It felt like an eternity. Elena's heart, which had been racing during the performance, now felt like it might stop completely. Oh no, it had been terrible. They had hated it. She had made a complete fool of herself. She had broken the rules, played far too long, done something completely inappropriate for an audition. The panic started to rise in her chest. What had she done? What had she been thinking? Slowly, terrified of what she would see, Elena opened her eyes and lifted her hands from the keys. And then she heard it, a sound that started quietly but grew rapidly. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor. Elena turned her head toward the judges' table, her vision slightly blurred from the intensity of her performance. Katerina Petrova was standing. Not just standing, but standing tall, her expression one of complete astonishment. The other two judges were rising to their feet as well, their faces showing emotions Elena couldn't quite read. Shock, amazement, disbelief. Then Katerina Petrova began to clap. Not polite, measured applause. Real applause. Enthusiastic, genuine applause. The other judges joined her, And then, from the back of the hall, the sound multiplied. All those people who had gathered to listen began applauding too. Students, faculty, staff, everyone. The applause grew louder and louder, filling the hall with a sound almost as powerful as the music had been. Elena sat frozen at the piano, unable to process what was happening. She looked at the standing judges. She looked at the crowd at the back of the hall, which seemed to have grown to dozens of people. Everyone was clapping. Some people were even cheering. Sophia was crying and clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. Elena stood on the stage, her legs trembling so badly she worried they might give out beneath her. The applause continued, washing over her like a wave she didn't know how to swim through. Her mind couldn't process what was happening. This wasn't how she had imagined things going. She had expected polite confusion at best, harsh criticism at worst. Not this, never this. Slowly, gradually, the applause began to fade. People stopped clapping, but the energy in the room remained charged, electric. Everyone was looking at her. Dozens of eyes all focused on the small, nervous girl who had somehow just turned their entire world upside down. The silence that followed the applause was almost worse than the noise. It pressed down on Elena like a weight. What was she supposed to do now? What happened next? Katerina Petrovna removed her glasses and began cleaning them, a gesture that seemed oddly casual given what had just occurred. But her hands were shaking slightly. Even from the stage, Elena could see it. One of the other judges, a distinguished older man with silver hair, leaned over to whisper something to Katerina. She nodded in response, put her glasses back on, and looked directly at Elena. "Miss Volkov," Katerina's voice carried clearly through the hall. It was a rich, warm voice with a slight accent. "Would you please wait in the anteroom? We need to confer, and then we would like to speak with you." Elena managed to nod, though she wasn't entirely sure her neck was actually moving. "Yes, of course," she heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. She walked off the stage on legs that didn't feel quite connected to her body. The crowd at the back of the hall parted to let her through. As she passed, some people reached out to touch her arm or shoulder, offering quick words of encouragement. "That was incredible," someone whispered. "I've never heard anything like it," another voice said. Sophia intercepted her in the hallway, pulling her into a fierce hug. "Oh my God, Elena, oh my God, that was... I don't even have words." Elena hugged her back, grateful for something solid to hold on to. "Did I? Was it okay?" "I think I played too long. I broke the rules. They probably hate me." Sophia pulled back to look at her friend's face. "Are you serious right now?" "Elena, they gave you a standing ovation." The judges stood up. "That doesn't happen. Like ever. But I was supposed to just play a folk melody and You played your soul," Sophia interrupted. "And it was beautiful." "No, better than beautiful. It was real." The anteroom was small and quiet, a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere of the concert hall. Elena sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performance was draining away, leaving her feeling hollow and shaky. She looked down at her hands. They were still trembling. These hands that had just played with such confidence and power now looked small and uncertain. Had she really just done that? Had that actually happened? Or was she about to wake up and discover this was all a strange dream? Through the walls she could hear muffled voices. The judges were conferring. About her. About what she had done. Were they angry that she had exceeded the audition requirements? Were they impressed? Were they confused? Elena's mind raced through everything that had just occurred. She had walked onto that stage as one person, and walked off as someone completely different. The secret she had kept for so long, hidden in notebooks and played only in forgotten practice rooms, was now out in the world. There was no taking it back. No hiding anymore. The thought was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Minutes passed like hours. Elena stared at the wall, replaying parts of her performance in her mind. Had she made mistakes? Probably. Her fingers had stumbled in a few places during the more complex passages, but the overall piece, the emotional arc of it, that had felt right, that had felt true. The door opened suddenly, making Elena jump. It was the assistant who had been calling names for auditions. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Oh, curiosity?" "Maybe a bit of both. The judges are ready for you now," he said quietly. Elena stood up, smoothing down her simple dress with nervous hands. This was it. Whatever happened next would determine. What exactly? Her future? Her career? Whether she had made a brilliant move or a catastrophic mistake. She followed the assistant back down the hallway. They passed other students who stared at her openly now. Some smiled. Others looked envious. One girl looked angry, probably upset that her own perfectly adequate audition had been completely overshadowed. At the door to the concert hall, the assistant paused. "Just so you know," he said quietly, "I've been working these auditions for 5 years. I've never seen anything like what just happened in there." Elena didn't know if that was meant to comfort her or make her more nervous. Maybe both. The concert hall felt different now. Emptier. Most of the crowd had dispersed, though a few people still lingered at the back. The judges sat at their table, papers and folders spread before them. They looked up as Elena approached. Her footsteps echoed in the large space. The piano still sat on the stage where she had left it, the bench slightly askew from where she had stood up. It seemed impossible that just 20 minutes ago she had been sitting there, pouring her heart out through music. Elena stopped a respectful distance from the judges' table, her hands clasped in front of her to keep them from shaking. She tried to read their expressions but found it impossible. Katerina Petrova's face was thoughtful, unreadable. The silver-haired man looked serious. The third judge, a younger woman, appeared to be suppressing a smile. The silence stretched out. Elena felt like she might shatter from the tension. Finally, Katerina Petrova spoke. "Miss Volkov, please sit down." There was a chair positioned near the table, presumably for interviews with the auditionees. Elena sat perching on the edge of the seat, her back rigid with tension. Katerina leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. What we just heard was, well, it was quite unexpected. Elena's heart sank. Unexpected. That sounded like a polite way of saying inappropriate. "I'm sorry," she blurted out. "I know I was only supposed to play a folk melody. I didn't mean to. I just thought—" Katerina held up a hand, stopping her. "Please don't apologize. Let me finish." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "What you played was extraordinary. Completely, undeniably extraordinary." Elena blinked, not sure she had heard correctly. "I what?" The silver-haired judge spoke up. "In my 40 years of teaching and judging competitions, I have rarely heard a composition so mature and emotionally sophisticated from someone so young. Tell me, how long have you been composing?" Since I was about 12, Elena managed to say. "But I've never shown anyone. Until today." "Never shown anyone?" The younger female judge sounded genuinely shocked. "You've been creating music like this and keeping it to yourself?" Elena nodded, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I didn't think it was good enough. I didn't think I was good enough." Katerina and the other judges exchanged meaningful glances. Katerina shook her head slowly. "Miss Volkov, I need you to understand something. What you played today wasn't just good. It was exceptional. The way you developed that folk melody, the structural sophistication of your composition, the emotional honesty of your performance, these are not the abilities of an amateur. These are the abilities of a genuine artist." Elena felt tears building behind her eyes. She fought them back. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to girls like her, quiet girls from small villages, scholarship students who sat in the back of classes. "I don't understand," she whispered. "My professor says I'm too mechanical. My classmates think I lack soul. I'm nobody." "Well, your professor's blind and your classmates are wrong," the silver-haired judge said bluntly. "What we heard today was anything but mechanical. It was one of the most soulful performances I've witnessed in years." Katerina nodded in agreement. "The question we need to ask you now, Miss Volkov, is why have you been hiding this remarkable gift? What made you decide to reveal it today?" Elena thought about that question, about all those nights in the basement practice room, about her mother's words regarding bread and ovens, about finally becoming tired of being invisible. "I was afraid," she said simply. "I'm still afraid. But I realized that being afraid forever meant never really living. So I decided to just try, to let myself be seen, even if it meant failing." "And what if I told you that you didn't fail?" Katerina asked gently. "What if I told you that what you did today was exactly what we've been searching for in these auditions?" Elena looked up, meeting Katerina's eyes for the first time. "But the competition? The rules said to play a simple folk melody." "Yes, they did," Katerina agreed, a small smile forming on her face. "And you did play a folk melody." You just didn't stop there. You showed us what else you could do with it. You showed us your artistic vision, your compositional skill, your courage. You showed us exactly who you are as a musician." The younger judge leaned forward. "The rules are guidelines, Miss Volkov. What we're really looking for are artists who have something genuine to say. We've heard 22 perfectly adequate folk melodies today. Technically proficient, musically appropriate, completely forgettable. Then you walked onto that stage and gave us something we'll remember for the rest of our lives." Elena couldn't hold back the tears anymore. The judges asked Elena to stay for another hour, asking questions about her background, her training, and most importantly, her compositions. Katerina wanted to know everything. How many pieces had she written? What inspired her? Had she studied composition formally, or was this all intuitive? Elena answered as honestly as she could, though it felt strange to be talking about something she had kept secret for so long. She told them about the notebooks full of music, about the basement practice rooms, about writing melodies in her head while helping her family in the bakery, then rushing to write them down before she forgot. "You have more compositions?" The silver-haired judge asked, his eyes widening. "How many more?" "I don't know exactly," Elena admitted. "Maybe 30 or 40 pieces. Some are just fragments. Some are complete. I've been working on a full piano sonata for about a year, but it's not finished yet." The judges looked at each other again, those meaningful glances that seemed to communicate entire conversations without words. "Miss Volkov," Katerina said finally, "we need to discuss your future. But first I need to tell you something important. The official results of this competition won't be announced for another 2 weeks. We have more auditions scheduled in other cities. However," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I can tell you that you should prepare yourself for some significant changes in your life." Elena's heart hammered in her chest. "What kind of changes?" "The kind where your music gets the attention it deserves," Katerina said with a warm smile. "But we'll discuss details later. For now, go home. Rest. Process what happened today. And Miss Volkov?" "Yes?" "Bring those notebooks of yours to our next meeting. I want to see everything you've written." When Elena finally left the concert hall, she found Sophia waiting in the hallway along with a small crowd of other students. Word had spread throughout the entire conservatory. Everyone wanted to know what had happened behind closed doors with the judges. Sophia hugged her again. "So? Tell me everything." But Elena was too overwhelmed to talk about it. She just shook her head, fresh tears threatening. "Can we go home? I need to. I just need to be quiet for a while." Sophia understood. She shooed away the curious students and guided Elena out of the building. The walk back to their dormitory was a blur. Elena felt disconnected from her body, like she was floating slightly above herself, watching everything happen to someone else. By the time they reached their room, Elena's phone had exploded with messages. Her family had somehow heard already. The conservatory had posted something on social media about an extraordinary audition performance, and someone from her village had seen it and called her parents. There were 7 missed calls from her mother, 12 text messages from her father and brothers. Even her grandmother, who barely knew how to use a phone, had managed to send a text that just said, "Proud of you," in all capitals. Elena sat on her bed staring at her phone, not knowing how to respond to any of it. How could she explain what had happened when she didn't fully understand it herself? Sophia ordered them both food from a nearby restaurant, insisting Elena needed to eat something. While they waited for delivery, word continued to spread. Elena's phone kept buzzing with messages from classmates, some congratulating her, others asking questions, a few that seemed tinged with jealousy or disbelief. Professor Hoffman sent an email. Elena opened it with trembling hands, half expecting criticism or confusion. Instead, she found an apology. "Dear Elena," it read, "I owe you a profound apology. I completely misjudged your abilities and your artistic voice. What you revealed today was extraordinary, and I am ashamed that I was too blind to see it earlier. You have taught me an important lesson about making assumptions. I would be honored to continue working with you if you'll have me as your teacher. With deep respect and admiration, Professor Hoffman." Elena read the email 3 times, unable to quite believe it. Her strict, critical professor was apologizing to her? The food arrived, and Sophia forced Elena to eat, though everything still tasted like cardboard. Elena's stomach was too knotted with anxiety and excitement and fear and joy and about 1,000 other emotions she didn't have names for. That evening, as darkness fell over Vienna, Elena finally called her parents. Her mother answered on the first ring and immediately started crying happy tears. Her father grabbed the phone, his voice thick with emotion. "We always knew," he kept saying. "We always knew you had something special." Her brothers were shouting in the background, wanting to talk to their famous sister. Her grandmother came, on the line, speaking in their village dialect, telling Elena that she had always known that little girl playing piano in the church would do something amazing someday. After the call ended, Elena sat on her bed feeling simultaneously full and empty. The secret that had defined her for years was out in the world now. There was no taking it back, no returning to being invisible. The next morning, Elena woke to discover that the conservatory's social media post about her audition had gone viral in classical music circles. Someone had recorded a small portion of her performance on their phone and uploaded it. Within hours, it had thousands of views. Comments poured in from professional musicians, critics, and music lovers around the world. Who is this girl? This is stunning. The emotion in this playing is extraordinary. Where can I hear the full composition? Elena's inbox filled with messages from people she didn't know. Music journalists requesting interviews, bloggers wanting to write about her, other conservatories asking if she might consider transferring. Even a few small record labels reaching out with interest. It was overwhelming and terrifying and exciting all at once. At school, everything changed. Students who had never spoken to her before suddenly wanted to be her friend. Teachers who had barely noticed her now greeted her warmly in the halls. The students who used to whisper about the scholarship girl now whispered about that incredible performance instead. Not everyone was happy about her sudden fame. A few of the conservatory's star students seemed resentful. One girl, who had been considered a top competitor for the competition, made a snide comment about breaking the rules and getting rewarded for it. But most people were genuinely supportive. Other quiet students, the ones who also sat in the back of classes, approached Elena shyly to tell her that she had inspired them, that she had made them feel like maybe they could be brave too. 3. Days after the audition, Elena received a formal letter from the competition organizers. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was an invitation to a meeting with Katerina Petrova and the other judges. The letter mentioned discussing opportunities and future prospects, but didn't specify what that meant. Elena went to the meeting with Sophia, who refused to let her go alone. They arrived at a cafe near the conservatory, the kind of elegant Viennese place with tiny cups of coffee and perfect pastries. Katerina was already there, sitting at a corner table. She stood when Elena approached, greeting her warmly. "Thank you for coming. Please sit. Your friend can join us too." They sat and a server brought coffee. Katerina waited until they were alone before speaking. "I'm not going to make you wait for the official announcement," she said, a smile playing at her lips. "You won the competition, Elena. Unanimously. We didn't even need to deliberate." Elena felt the world tilt slightly. But there are more auditions. In other cities." "There were," Katerina corrected. "We've canceled them. There's no point. We found what we were looking for." Sophia grabbed Elena's hand under the table, squeezing tight. Katerina continued. "But winning the competition is actually the smallest part of what I want to discuss with you. Elena, I want to mentor you personally, help you develop your compositional voice, introduce you to publishers, conductors, people who can help your music reach the audience it deserves." Elena couldn't speak. She just stared. "I haven't taken on a private student in over 10 years, Katerina said. "But what I heard in your audition, that's the kind of talent that appears maybe once in a generation. I would consider it an honor to work with you." "I don't understand why," Elena finally managed to say. "Why me? I'm nobody. I'm just a student who got lucky with a scholarship." Katerina reached across the table and took Elena's hand. You need to stop saying things like that. You're not nobody. You're not lucky. You're talented. Genuinely, remarkably talented. And it's time you started believing that. She pulled out a folder and opened it. Inside were several documents. This is a contract offer from a music publisher. They want to publish your compositions. This one is from a small orchestra that wants to commission a new piece from you. And this, she pulled out another paper, is an invitation to perform your concerto at a prestigious concert series next season. Elena looked at the papers, unable to process what she was seeing. Publishers, commissions, performances. These were things that happened to real composers, professional musicians, not to scared girls from small villages. I know this is overwhelming, Katerina said gently. And you don't have to decide anything right now. But Elena, your music deserves to be heard. You deserve to be heard. The world needs artists like you, artists who have something real to say. Sophia was crying now, not even trying to hide it. She squeezed Elena's hand so hard it almost hurt. 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind that Elena could barely keep up with. The official competition results were announced and her name was at the top of the list. The prize included the recording contract and performance tour she had read about on that bulletin board. But somehow those things felt secondary to everything else that was happening. The video clip of her performance had been viewed over 500,000 times. Major classical music publications ran articles about the hidden prodigy from a small Eastern European village who had stunned judges with an unexpected original composition. Some outlets called it the audition that broke the internet. Elena didn't know how to feel about the attention. Part of her wanted to hide from it, to return to her quiet corner practice rooms where nobody was watching. But another part of her, a part that was growing stronger each day, was learning to step into the light. Katerina had been true to her word. She began mentoring Elena, meeting with her 3 times a week to discuss composition technique, artistic development, and the practical realities of being a professional musician. These sessions were nothing like Elena's classes at the conservatory. Katerina treated her as a colleague, an equal, someone whose artistic voice deserved respect. Stop apologizing for your choices, Katerina told her during one session when Elena had tentatively suggested a harmonic progression in a new piece she was writing. This is your composition, your voice. Own it. It was hard advice to follow after years of making herself small, but Elena was trying. Slowly, gradually, she was learning to trust her own instincts. The music publisher had offered her a contract, and after having lawyers review it, Elena signed. Her compositions would be professionally engraved, published, and distributed to musicians around the world. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Soon, people she had never met would be playing music she had created in her lonely midnight practice sessions. The piece that had been her audition, the one that transformed from her grandmother's lullaby into something entirely her own, was the first to be published. They titled it Lullaby Variations and Concerto in E minor. Elena had wanted to call it something simpler, but Katerina insisted the title should reflect what it actually was: a major work. A few weeks after signing the publishing contract, Elena received a package from her village. Inside was a letter from her parents and a small worn notebook. She recognized it immediately. It was her grandmother's recipe book, the one she had used for decades in the family bakery. Her mother's letter explained, "Your grandmother wanted you to have this. She said you'll understand why. You've taken our family recipes and made them your own, just like you did with her lullaby. She's so proud of you. We all are." Elena sat on her bed holding the old notebook, tears streaming down her face. Inside were recipes written in her grandmother's shaky handwriting, notes in the margins about adjustments and substitutions, stains from years of use. It was a record of creativity and tradition, of taking something old and making it new while honoring its roots. It was exactly what she had done with music. At the conservatory, Elena's daily life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. She no longer sat in the back of classes, not because she was trying to be noticed, but because she had finally stopped trying to be invisible. She participated in discussions. She offered her opinions. When Professor Hoffman asked her to demonstrate a technique, she did so without her hands shaking. The other students treated her differently now, too. Some with respect, some with curiosity, a few with lingering jealousy. But Elena was learning that she couldn't control how others perceived her. She could only control who she chose to be. Sophia remained her closest friend, keeping her grounded when everything felt overwhelming. "Remember when you couldn't even eat breakfast before the audition?" Sophia would tease. "Look at you now, signing contracts and working with Katerina Petrova." But Sophia also knew when Elena needed quiet. When the pressure of sudden attention became too much, they would order food and watch movies in their dorm room, just being normal students for a few hours. The small orchestra commission was both exciting and terrifying. They wanted a 15-minute piece for chamber ensemble to premiere in 6 months. Elena worked on it obsessively, filling notebook after notebook with ideas, crossing out passages, rewriting sections dozens of times. During one mentoring session, Katerina found Elena surrounded by crumpled papers. Looking frustrated and exhausted. "What's wrong?" Katerina asked. "It's not good enough," Elena said, gesturing at her work. "Everything I write sounds forced or fake. I keep trying to write something impressive, something worthy of a commission, but it all feels wrong." Katerina picked up one of the discarded pages and studied it. "This is technically proficient. Well-structured. But you're right, it doesn't sound like you. It sounds like you're trying to write what you think they want to hear. Isn't that what I should do?" "Absolutely not," Katerina said firmly. "They commissioned you because of what you played in that audition. Your voice, your honesty, your unique perspective. If they wanted something generic and impressive, they could have hired any number of competent composers. They wanted you specifically because you're different." Elena let those words sink in. She had been so afraid of disappointing people that she had started hiding again, just in a different way. That night she returned to the basement practice room, her old haven, the place where she had always felt safe to be herself. She sat at the out-of-tune piano and closed her eyes, blocking out all the pressure and expectations and fear. She thought about her village, about her family, about the feeling of kneading bread dough with her mother early in the morning, about her brother's laughter, about her grandmother's stories, about the church where she had first learned to play piano, where that traveling musician had heard her all those years ago. She thought about why she loved music in the first place, not for recognition or success or impressing anyone, but because it let her express things she couldn't say with words. Because it connected her to something deeper than everyday life. Because it was honest in a way that nothing else could be. And then she started to write, not the commission piece she was supposed to be working on. Just music. Music that felt true. Music that came from her heart instead of her head. By 3 in the morning, she had the foundation of something real. It wasn't impressive or showy. It was quiet and intimate and deeply personal. It was about distance and connection, about being far from home but carrying home inside you wherever you go. She brought it to Katerina the next day, nervous but more confident than she had been. Katerina read through the score slowly, humming parts of it under her breath. When she finished, she looked up with shining eyes. "This is it," she said simply. "This is what they need to hear. This is you." The months that followed were a blur of creativity and growth. Elena completed the commission piece, incorporating those midnight ideas into something she was genuinely proud of. She continued working with Katerina, learning not just about composition but about being an artist in the world, how to handle criticism, how to stay true to your vision while remaining open to collaboration, how to deal with success without losing yourself. The recording sessions for the competition prize were intimidating. Elena had never worked in a professional studio before. Engineers and producers and so many people all focused on capturing her music perfectly. But when she sat at the grand piano and began to play her lullaby composition, the one that had changed everything, she found that same place of truth and honesty she had accessed during the audition. The premiere of her commissioned chamber piece happened on a cold evening in early spring. Elena sat in the audience watching professional musicians perform her work for the first time. Hearing her music played by others was surreal. It was no longer just hers. It belonged to the world now. The piece was well received. Critics praised its emotional depth and mature compositional voice. But what mattered most to Elena were the people who came up to her afterward with tears in their eyes, telling her that the music had touched something deep inside them, that it had made them feel less alone. That, Elena realized, was what it had always been about. Not fame or success or proving she belonged, but connection, communication. Using music to say the things that were too big or too complex or too deep for ordinary words. The European performance tour began that summer. 6 countries, 12 concerts, performing her lullaby composition and other pieces she had written. Elena's family came to the Vienna concert, her first performance in her adopted city. She saw them in the audience, her mother crying before she had even played a note. Her father trying to hide his emotions behind his hand, her brothers sitting unusually still and quiet, her grandmother nodding with satisfaction as if she had known all along this was how things would turn out. Before that concert, standing backstage with her hands shaking just like they had for the audition, Elena realized something important. The fear never completely went away. The doubt never fully disappeared. But courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to step forward despite the fear, choosing to be seen even when hiding felt safer. She walked onto that stage, sat at the piano, and began to play. Between concerts, Elena returned to teach a masterclass at the conservatory.